You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcasts. And I have a great guest today, Adrian Bejan. He's the J.A. Jones Professor of Mechanical Engineering at Duke University. And his research covers quite a lot, engineering science and applied physics, which includes thermodynamics, heat transfer, convection, design and evolution in nature. And Professor Bejan was ranked in 2001 among the most 100 highly cited authors worldwide in engineering, which is pretty amazing. He's received 18 honorary doctorates from universities in 11 countries. He's the author of 30 books and over 650 peer-referred articles, which is also crazy. We're going to talk about his current work and two of his recent books I'll mention for listeners, The Physics of Life, The Evolution of Everything. And this book explores the roots and big questions by examining the deepest urges and properties of living things, both animate and inanimate. It's quite a lot more description after that, but I'll just jump ahead to the other book I'll mention is Design in Nature, How the Constructal Law Governs Evolution of Biology, Physics, and Technology, and Social Organizations. So Professor Bejan is so prolific, it's not possible to even go into a small amount of all the things he's written or discussed. So that's why, Professor, I want to open it up to you today. What topics and questions are most intriguing to you and interesting and fascinating that you want to talk about today? Let's cover those.
Well, the most intriguing, I hope, for the audience are the big questions or the big things we hear discussed in the news and also in the press that cover science. Ideas that presumably everybody agrees with, but they happen to be wrong. So I'll just list three to guide our discussion. One is that nature is complicated. Another one is that we cannot predict nature because nature is unpredictable or random. And the third is that we are threatened by all sorts of explosions, quote unquote, population, complexity, things are getting faster and faster. Okay, so these are the three things that now, only in retrospect, I see as the reasons why the current discussion and understanding of nature itself deserves a reality check. And in fact, I'll address these three items. Nature is really not complicated because if it really were complicated, we wouldn't be able to observe it and remember it by means of simple drawings and discuss it. We would not have science, which is actually a very simple, thin book consisting of very, very few laws. That's simplicity, not complication. We would not have had art and artists, starting with the cave paintings, if nature were that complicated. The second one is that nature is, in fact, predictable. This is what people do with science. They, in fact, get addicted to science in order to know better what will happen tomorrow, so that tomorrow the person who wakes up is safe, not threatened by a beast or a neighbor or by gravity itself. In other words, in the morning, the person knows not to walk off the balcony, you see. So that's science. The future is predictable, more and more so, the better and more powerful and more extensive our science. And the other thing, the third one about explosions, they are good when they come from talented, what do you call these people who in the at the county fair predict the future by looking into a crystal ball? Yeah, fortune tellers. Those are nice stories, but I don't see any explosions. In fact, the population is, according to the United Nations, projected to reach its peak in the year 2050. So we're in fact on the slow down portion of that hill-shaped curve. Complexity too. It's not getting out of hand. Had that been the case, by the way, the nature, Earth would have had so much time at its disposal to become complex beyond recognition, you see. So no, complexity, like everything else that fits in our mental dealings and also in our drawings, is modest, moderate, discernible, and worth telling others about. So these are the things that inspire me to become vociferous and, as you said, prolific. I have a few things to tell my audience that they happen to be not only different, but they have the power of correcting what I hear being discussed all over the place without questioning.
Well, okay, so why do you believe people have a sense, right or wrong, that things are so complex that things are exploding? Why do people feel these things, or at least talk about them as if they feel them then?
Well, I don't know. Obviously, these days, unlike when I was a student, because of the digital age and because of communications in everybody's palm, the iPhone, and everybody writes and publishes, there's a lot more, chatter going on. And, when that happens, the road to the Tower of Babel is clear. In other words, the people who articulate things that sound scientific are not really trained. And in addition, even if they were trained, they do not take the time to understand for themselves the meaning of the words they speak. And so, yes, I belong to the older generation where these particular topics had a very, very clear and crisp and simple definition. So this actually brings me to my background. I was trained 50 years ago at MIT. All my degrees are from there. My specialty, or the subject I liked the most back then, was thermodynamics. Thermodynamics is everything that has to do with a movement that comes from power, and the power comes from burning fuels in machines or metabolism in animals. So our fuel is, according to thermodynamics, the same as our food and the food for animals. So you see, thermodynamics is about everything, and yes, it is about everything that moves. And of course, when I look around, I see everything moving, everything changing, everything morphing. And it took me more than 30 years to discover the aha that what I was in fact practicing as research in the domain of man-made designs is 100% applicable to everything else that flows and morphs around me in nature. The river basins, the river deltas, the trees in the garden, the animals all over, swimming, running, and flying, all the way, of course, to our own vehicles, which do the same thing as the animals, but on a bigger scale. I'm talking about aquatic and terrestrial and air traveling vehicles. So you see, the evolution of a scientist is is no different than the evolution of everything. It is a movie in which what worked in the past is kept, and to that, new and better helpful constructs are added. That's how the the book of science grows, but that is also how the architectural river basin becomes better. How the horse came to be a horse, all the way to, incidentally, to how a racehorse gets to be better, and how an athlete gets to be better, and how your car gets to be better from 1 year to the next. That's the movie, the physics of evolution that is the story that I tell these days, especially in the two books that you mentioned and which I recommend to the listeners.
Well, let's talk about that. So, what are the physics of evolution, and what's the purpose of the goal of evolution if you look at it through the lens of physics?
Well, okay. Well, the facts. In other words, the observations that repeat themselves in the billions are that, first of all, nothing moves unless it is driven. The driving comes from power. Power comes from engines. Nature is full of engines. I mentioned the animals. Of course, the engines made by people are very few and constructed very recently. But the whole globe, think of the atmosphere. The atmosphere is full of Earth-sized wheels driven by the Earth as an engine. The Earth engine is driven by heating from the sun and cooling by or to the cold sky. And this engine produces immense power, which drives all the things that move on Earth, animate and inanimate. Many of them we don't see, but all these movements. And by the way, movement it means everything that changes or location from here to there. Not only the water or the clouds, but energy such as heat also flows from high to low, like everything else that flows. There are other flows that the audience may not be familiar with. For example, the flow of a substance or a chemical species from a region with high concentration to a region to a lower concentration. The flow of humidity. You see, humid air flows as best it can from high humidity to low humidity. That's basically the name for evaporation or drying or the role that vegetation has on the surface of Earth. That role is that of putting the water vapor back into the wind, which is the place where the rain came from. You understand now? So that's the oneness of nature. That's part of what I know and what I teach, which is called thermodynamics. By the way, thermodynamics. It's a made-up word, and the first half, therme in Greek means heating, and dynamis in Greek means power. So that's it, and everything is that. Now, the movement that is driven by this power, which is from a natural engine, one that just happened, that movement is free to morph. It is free to morph. It doesn't happen through pipes that are suspended in the sky. The configuration of the winds and the river channels is not rigid, and so this freedom is what lies at the foundation of the changes in the drawing. So there is no drawing, no design of what is out there with us in it. It is a movie. So evolution is a movie, cartoons, if you wish, or a movie or a film of animated drawings. And this particular movie has a tape that runs in one direction. It runs in the direction of providing greater access to the currents that flow.
I guess I think of man-made things as closed systems, and nature seems to work well with open systems. The Earth itself is an open system.
No. Closed system, open system is part of the speech that needs to be checked before it is spoken. Closed systems are, the concept of closed system is a useful concept when one teaches the subject and one asks the student to solve relatively simple problems. There, in nature, everything is open. Closed system really means a bottle with an impermeable wall. You see.
Like an idealized system, but not reality.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so that's simplicity in the utmost. So that's one word I do not use. Now, the system is an important concept. System is up to you, the speaker. It is the entity, the region in space that you, with your mind, you have selected for the purpose of analysis or discussion. And you see, it is at this point that confusion is born. The system that is in your mind is not necessarily the system in the mind of the listener. So any discussion about nature must begin with a crisp and unambiguous definition of the system that is being discussed. This is why I insisted on deleting the word closed. All the systems have, if you think of them as drawings, meaning with boundaries, all of them have boundaries across which currents are flowing. Currents of a fluid, or of gas, or of solid, of heat. Not only that, but these boundaries can be moving in and out, meaning that the system is possibly compressed, or the system expands against its surroundings. There may be, shafts that turn, that penetrate this particular boundary, or maybe there are pistons that push or pull the position of the boundary, as they do in the cylinders fitted with pistons in engines of our kind. But the animals, of course, do plenty of things of pulling and pushing. If you watch nature films on TV, so that's the kind of most general system definition that applies to to anything.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the human body. So I'm sitting here and I'm breathing in and out, and my body heat is escaping to the surroundings around me, and I'm taking in air. And you're right, I'm not a closed system. I'm interacting with the environment in, I guess, a lot of ways. Sweat is wicking off of me. I mean, all kinds of things are happening. But maybe they're
absolutely. Yeah. That's right. That's a very good example. Incidentally, you just announced the best example, or the best instrument for the audience. The listener should put himself or herself in this discussion and think about his or her body from actually 24 hours a day. What the body does, what it goes through, obviously from ingesting to excreting, and how here's another very important aspect of the diurnal life. It is cyclical, meaning it has a rhythm. Rhythm too. You mentioned breathing. Breathing is a rhythm. It is a precise rhythm. It is amazingly precise. The inhaling time is the same as the exhaling time. This, by the way, through my work, is predictable, but this has been predicted because I think I was the first one to ask the question of why is this so? It is so. Now you mentioned the word purpose. For the purpose of this animal to have oxygen coming in and CO2 going out at the required rate, required by the size of the animal, but to happen in a thorax of a minimal volume or minimal weight. Why minimal? Because it is only when the baggage, meaning the actual body, is light, that the animal is a competitive mover as a vehicle on the landscape. You see, the animal obviously uses power to move, and the lighter, meaning the smaller the baggage, the better for the movement, which means the survival of the animal. Use your imagination to run away from predators, or to get faster to the food. Finding food is a drag, on and on and on. So the animal.
What do you I have a quick question here. Why do you say that life is simple? It seems, when you think about just the human body, it seems unbelievably complex. It seems that life seems to do and want simple things, but the way that life functions itself seems to be incredibly complex.
No, it's actually not that complex. The animal, here we're talking about mammals, the animal has one heart. The heart is a precise fraction in size, fraction of the total body size. That fraction is the same in the body of the cat and the body of the dog and the body of the mouse and roughly speaking. So you see, that's simplicity. I'll give you more. I mentioned the equality of the inhaling and exhaling times. Well, the mouse has the same sort of surprise, equality of inhaling and exhaling, except that the frequency of breathing in the mouse is greater, meaning the mouse breathes more frequently. And the fact that that should be the case, meaning the elephant should take fewer breaths per minute than a human, that is also part of the predictable design. You see, every time one can predict from physics how nature should be, that is in fact a proclamation of simplicity, not complication. The word complex, by the way, means twisted together beyond recognition. That's what the word means. And the things that I'm illustrating for you are things that are recognizable and easy to draw.
Okay, makes sense. So what surprises have you experienced, maybe even recently in your research and your thoughts? What really amazes you or surprises you?
Well, first of all, I actually came up with many. I listed some already. I'll tell you more.
Because you talk about these things like you seem like a very relaxed, happy-go-lucky person. You're like everything's simple and understandable.
Yeah, correct.
That's why I asked it.
But as I said, I'm going to give you a few more examples. But what surprises me is two things. First, that the people who hear these things are surprised, as if they haven't really figured them out. And that is a surprise. The other surprise is that the more they hear me, the more they tell me that they've known these things all along. Okay, that's a science news for you. The first reaction actually is silence. Then there's this surprise, and then there is everybody knew this, so this is not new. In fact, all these stages of response are a compliment to the person who comes up with these unusual predictions to questions that are not raised. Okay, so I gave you a few examples. Here are a few more. The architecture of the botanical tree, from the root to the trunk, and then the canopy, and then to the forest itself. All those things, those drawings, are predictable from the physics. And in fact, I didn't finish what the punchline of the physics, which is that in this movie of design evolution, the movie tape is rolling in one direction. The direction is toward drawings that offer greater access. This is the recipe for discovering the drawing. Actually, the direction of the tape is the time arrow, the direction in which time itself is changing. And this statement that there is direction to the movie tape is the constructor law. The constructor law accounts for the universal phenomenon of physics called of evolution. And and before this particular law of physics, there was no place for evolution itself in physics. In fact, there was no place in physics even for the concept of design. In other words, the concept of a geometric image with purpose, an image that happens naturally. You see, that is the event in physics that you and I are discussing now. Anyway,
are you saying that things happen naturally because they have a purpose, or they were purposed to be that way?
No, they happen naturally because they belong in nature. Okay, nature is what it is, but the knowledge or the science of nature is called physics. This is a neologism from Greek. 150 years ago, up to 150 years ago, it was called natural science. And in Greek, that word is physis, which means everything that is. Now, Latin, which was contemporary with Greek, the word is natura. Natura literally means, it's feminine. Natura means she who gives birth to everything. There you have it. Incidentally, since we're now into the origin of words, the word evolution comes from the same period, antiquity, science, more than 2,000 years ago. Evolution comes from a Latin verb, evolvere, which means to roll out, to roll forth. When I speak those words, I think of what natura, she who gives birth to everything, does. You understand? In other words, evolution is a word in every language of Western civilization, and it is not something that was invented or coined by Darwin. You see? Now, to appreciate evolution, in other words, the direction of the movie tape, think of the opposite direction, which is to roll back. That is, of course, the mother of recoil, as in revolver, you see. And that is not what's happening, okay? Tomorrow is going to be different than today. This is the direction and purpose, or the law of purpose, or the law of evolution, which is the constructor law, guarantees that the future will be different than the past. It's actually an important observation that I just made, because there are lots of, let's say, people who think about the good old days, all the way to primitive man, good old days that would be much better to live under than what we have today, or what will be tomorrow. So there you have the even bigger implications of the discussion that we're having. But let me get back to my list of things that unexpected answers that I think have entertained my audience, meaning entertain the people who read my work. So yes, I predicted the architecture of the botanical tree without looking out through my window. In other words, I have an idea, I make a drawing, and to me, not surprisingly, my drawing looks like people's drawings in textbooks of botany. Okay, same with animal design. animal design, the one that fascinates us is animals moving. By the way, a stationary animal is also full of flows. The oyster and so on. It's actually a system flowing, breathing, all of this. But in the animals, for example, mammals have locomotion. They are running, swimming, flying. Well, those are rhythmic motions that are entirely predictable. And also predictable is the fact that the speeds of these bodies scale in a predictable way with the body size. The frequency, meaning the leg stride, the frequency of the wings flapping, and also the frequency of the fishtailing, these are predictable. They depend on body size. Along the way, when it comes to the constructal law applied to animal locomotion, I discovered that contrary to common knowledge, gravity matters to the fish. People think that the fish is neutrally buoyant. In other words, the fish is where it lives effortlessly. That happens to be true when the fish is asleep. But if the fish is moving in one direction, which means horizontally on Earth, underwater, but horizontally on Earth, the fish has to lift the water that's in front of it. And that means that the fish, just like the runner and the flyer, is a weightlifter. So this is a big thing because when it comes to animal locomotion, it makes the fish the same as the runner and the flyer, but also it explains why the runner in rising from water to be on land is like the fish, and why both the fish and the runner in rising into the air are in fact the parents of the flyer. So now you see that with a law of physics, one cannot help it but become a person who sees oneness in nature as opposed to blinding complexity. Okay, another discovery I made is why people unwittingly are attracted to drawings that are rectangles shaped as the golden ratio rectangles, like the business card. Business card has a vertical direction that's 2/3 of the horizontal direction, just like the computer screen and the movie screen and the paragraphs in a well laid out book and like all the flags in the world, by the way. Yeah, that's right. So I again by accident, in fact, anyway, there's a story goes with that. It occurred to me that all these shapes are preferred by everybody because these shapes are the easiest to be scanned. In other words, scanned the fastest with the two human eyes. The two human eyes, which are aligned on the horizontal, as if the world is flat, you see. And the positioning of the eyes makes it such that the scanning, in this case we have two scanners, left eye, right eye, they conspire to guide human choice such that the things that we come up with are and use everywhere are shaped this way. Well, not everything. There are some things that are shaped differently, like hanging ribbons, but those are very few compared with everything else that we attach to ourselves in order to read them. Another thing that I discovered from the physics of evolution is the fact that everything that spreads on Earth or is collected on Earth has a history shaped as an S-curve. Think of spilling a bucket of water on soft ground. The wetted area grows initially. It grows in time, yes, but initially it grows in a accelerating fashion as the water first invades the territory through its own fingers or river channels, and then later the dry interstices between the fingers become wet as water diffuses from the channels into the dry areas. So if you plot this particular wet area versus time, that curve is one that rises initially slow, then fast, and then slow again. The upper portion is also known in economics as diminishing returns, as in the sales of a particular gadget, say iPhone, originally displaying its S-curve, and then when the gadget is not new anymore, then yes, sales continue to increase, but slower and slower. It's the same with the spreading of news.
Right.
In fact, you can, I'm sure you take this podcast and you can plot the number of viewings versus time, and you will discover an S-curve. A better podcast,
that's true,
like a better iPhone, will have an S-curve that rises to be taller before it reaches its ceiling, you see. So this phenomenon, which is universal, is a manifestation of the constructive law of evolution everywhere. It's not only about spreading things, it is equally applicable or responsible for collecting things like mining or oil extraction. The architecture of galleries and wells underground is one that over the years has been growing in arborescent fashion. That's one thing. The architecture is the one that's invading the volume, and the volume invaded by it is growing over time in S-curve fashion. This is why mines and oil extraction sites reach the realm of diminishing returns, and why production eventually stops. It is not that they run out of these minerals. It is that the production rate is no longer high enough, meaning growing in time fast enough to be competitive with other economic opportunities that compete.
So how about the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule? That seems to be everywhere in nature.
Yeah, that too, by the way. It's funny, I made a list, but there are so many of these that I didn't occur to me to put it on the list. That's right. This is one of my most recent discoveries, is that hierarchy, wealth hierarchy, many people call that inequality, it's physics. In other words, unavoidable. And so I published this 2 years ago, and I published several papers, but this was 2 years ago, which was in fact right after the physics of life, the book The Physics of Life. But in The Physics of Life, I showed the seed of the idea, which is that first of all, as I said earlier, things move because they are driven by powerful burning fuels. Okay, so movement is proportional to fuel consumption. Now, the movement, if you look at the map of everything that moves, for example, freight moving on all these streets, avenues, and highways, or air traffic, or you name it, railroads, that movement is arborescent. It is tree-shaped, because everything that moves connects one point to an area, or an area to one point. And the drawing that is the most facilitating for this movement is tree-shaped. So let me review now. Movement comes from fuel consumed. The movement is tree-shaped. In The Physics of Life, I showed that the fuel consumed annually by any group, country or continent, or group of countries, the fuel consumed annual is proportional to the gross domestic product, which means the GDP or wealth. So fuel consumed is proportional to wealth. Fuel consumed is movement. The movement is hierarchical. And bingo, that means that the same physics means that the wealth is distributed hierarchically on the same territory. And so if you know the trees, which come from the movement, which is, of course, predictable, not only visible, then you discover that the hierarchy should be in such a way that Pareto was right. But Pareto was describing, he was not predicting, you see. So the existence of hierarchy in economics is yet another manifestation of the law of physics of evolution everywhere. Now, the reason why our discussion is important, and I thank you for bringing up the economic hierarchy, is that there is no topic more important at any point in human history than this. You know, inequality, hierarchy, the urge to tweak this particular phenomenon so that it is not dangerous for the people who belong in society. That's the
well, it tells you that if you try to tweak it, things will probably go back to the way they were, no matter what you do. You know,
correct, of course. Yeah,
taking from the rich.
That is what that is nature itself. Tweaking, maybe it is actually the act of, let's say, good intentions, perhaps, but nature eventually wins. We saw this with the Katrina disaster in New Orleans, tweaking the direction and dimension of the Mississippi with rigid barriers that were not maintained, eventually was disastrous. We see this everywhere, especially in wealth redistribution. Now, I lived my first 20 years under communism, and that was a social organization and economic system openly devoted to equality, and there was no such thing. Overnight, the equal became hierarchical, except that over the same night, the hierarchy was a lot sharper and with its peak invisible than before. Take a look at North Korea today. North Korea today is democratic only in name. You have no idea. Nobody knows. Everybody, of course, is quasi-equal, except for the peak that is not only beyond reach but beyond visibility. That's the way. Nature always wins. You can always count on that. This is why it's important to know physics. It's important to know physics so that you know how to predict the future, and that means so that you know what to do in order to live better tomorrow, and also important to know what not to do in order to live better tomorrow.
So what is the long-term implication? You know, where is everything heading in your estimation? Since you said it's going in one direction.
Everything is heading toward this evolutionary design of movement driven by power from obviously I mentioned the sources. I will not repeat. That movement is predictably becoming more and more enhanced. However, the enhancing is living its own SCurve history. In other words, it is heading toward a slowdown. And the reason for that, again, it's documented in the physics of light, is that the advanced societies in which we live, especially here in the West, and the high standard of living we're enjoying, this S-curve to which I referred, of growth, all these things are the result of the discovery of power from fuels in human-made machines. Before the steam engine, our predecessors had discovered the power from machines as well, from waterfalls and from windmills. Imagine those wonderful paintings from Holland. And those are actually great ideas, great jolt forward in comparison with our older predecessors in antiquity who discovered slavery. See, slavery and beasts of burden, the horse and the ox.
Right.
So imagine every single machine in the beginning. These are animal. Most recent, the steam engine, the internal combustion, and all the other engines that propel us by burning fuels. Every single one has set the human civilization in motion more and more, and none more effectively, more voluminously than the engines of the Industrial Revolution. And now, I read the news. I have not seen, never mind this thing with communications and all sorts of other, items in the news, all the way to cosmology. I have not seen anything more monumental or more influential for human movement than what happened with the likes of James Watt 200 years ago. And that is why there's the S-curve of human movement on the planet is heading toward its plateau of diminishing returns. We see this plateauing out in the GDPs of highly advanced countries, all of them, including the U.S., most notably in Western Europe. We don't see it yet in the S-curves of the currently developing countries, those examples from China to India and Brazil. But they all, of course, these growths are all, in fact, babies of the Industrial Revolution. And but all S-curves will be S-curves, meaning they will be tending toward their ceilings. And so that's the future. The future will be that of a advanced global organization that is, in fact, closer and closer to an equilibrium of, not equilibrium, there's no such thing, but an architecture that would easily be confused with one that's not evolving anymore. So
okay.
You forced me to make a prediction. Unfortunately for me, I will not live long enough to receive applause for this prediction. Okay, so.
Yeah. Well, Adrian, we're almost out of time, but I could say that the things you've discovered and thought about, a lot of people could say, oh, they're obvious or they're common sense, but I know in my own life, a lot of the greatest things that I've figured out, sure, you could say they're obvious or they're common sense, but until you experience them yourself, maybe that's why people don't think about them or seem to think about them or just pass them off as common sense or obvious. But, when you experience something like that, it does change you and affect you. It's like a great truth. I think the great truths are really powerful to experience. So they're good things.
Yeah, I totally agree. By the way, if you have another minute, I will
sure.
add a couple. Two more things. What you said is very true. For the listener, what's very important is to, frankly, to do what I do unwittingly, which is to ask questions, to question authority. To say, hey, listen, define the meaning of your words, such as system, okay, or what do you mean by complexity? I have a whole list of these words that sound well understood when, in fact, they're misused. So that's one thing. And this sort of teaching, not only to teach, in my case, I teach students, to teach them to question, but to reward them for their ability to stand up and speak out and question. I mean, that sort of thing is worth propagating. The other thing, because you asked me in writing to tell you what are the benefits of the kind of work that I do. Well, I did say the benefit is I can predict the future better and better. Well, I can predict actually the evolution of the technologies. In fact, I have published the evolution of airplanes, not only the past but also the future. The evolution of helicopters. These are big things, very useful to know. Very valuable to know how to make the drawing for the new airplane model in such a way that you do not start from scratch. I can tell anybody. In fact, I published what the drawing should have as its main features next time somebody sits down to make it. I can tell you, for example, that the drawing should have a fuselage that's almost the same length as the wingspan, or that in a helicopter, the fuselage length of the helicopter should be the same as the rotor diameter. Now, the listener may take these statements of mine as obvious because current designs look that way, except that I did not look at anything. I predicted these features from the principle, and since the principle is a law of physics, it means that tomorrow and in 10 years from now, the new models will in fact be evolved specimens of the same animal species. The animal species that I'm discussing here is the human and machine species, because the airplane is present because of people. People in the airplane
Gotcha.
are the live force system that the airplane is.
All right. Well, Adrian, we're unfortunately we're out of time. So, last question, very quick. What are so we can get your books on Amazon, and what are other ways to find out where you publish? Just look you up by name.
Yeah, right. The best way is to first of all on Amazon. Yes, that's where my books are available, and in fact, I would really appreciate if the listeners will do that. They are not expensive. The other way to find news about me is to Google my name, or to simply write to me. My email address is on the Duke website, and I'm easy to find. I'm not hiding.
Well, that's great, Adrian. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard. All the best. Bye-bye.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.